Hello everybody. So we're going to go over your simple genetics and Punnett Square Practice today. And the first thing that I'd ask you to do is go ahead and define gene, allele, heredity, and genetics. So if we remember from our notes, a gene is just a segment of DNA that codes for a certain trait, such as eye color. So you can have a gene for eye color. An allele is going to be a version of that gene. So the alleles for eye color, or two examples of that, are going to be blue or brown. And there's other examples, and it can be more complex, but blue and brown are two examples of an allele for eye color. Heredity then is going to be the transmission of genes from one generation to the next, and genetics is the scientific study of heredity. Down here in your first question, it says the physical traits of an organism are called phenotypes. Okay, so your eye color is a phenotype. Gregor Mendel studied peas. An example of a phenotype in peas is actually the pea color. So looking over here at the right, it asks, to use this image, what are the two possible phenotypes for pea color? And so remember, phenotypes are physical characteristics. The two phenotypes for pea color then are yellow and green. So we just write that in there, yellow and green. Okay. And then moving on down below, we see that a genotype is going to be different than a phenotype. So a phenotype is a physical characteristic, where a genotype is the genetic makeup of an organism, and it will determine the phenotype. A genotype is going to be written as the combination of two alleles. And remember, alleles are versions of a gene, and alleles are represented by a single letter. So for peas, the allele for color can be the green allele or the yellow allele. And green allele is big G, yellow allele is small g. The green allele is dominant over the yellow allele, and dominant alleles are noted by that capital letter again, while recessive alleles are written as a lowercase letter. We see that down here. So I went ahead and filled this chart out for you. We can see that the genotype big G, so you have two alleles here. One came from the mother, one came from the father, from each parent, would result in a green pea. Big G, small g, so you have one green allele, one yellow allele, also results in a green pea, but we call that a heterozygous individual, meaning different alleles here, big G, small g. Big G still wins though because it is dominant and it results in a green pea. And finally down here you have a homozygous recessive individual with a genotype small g. Both of those are the yellow allele, and since there is no green allele to override it, it must result in a green pea. So that is homozygous recessive. Homozygous means same. Homozygous dominant is the same as well, but it's big G. Okay, moving on then. So it says a genotype may be described as either heterozygous, homozygous recessive, or homozygous dominant. We just discussed that. And we want to use that information in order to solve these problems down below. So for number 6, it says in peas, purple flowers, capital P, that's the allele, are dominant to white flowers, lowercase p. Fill in the blanks below with the correct genotype and flower color. We already completed one example for you here. So homozygous dominant, remember homozygous meaning the same, so big P. Dominant is going to be capital letters. That's going to result in purple because purple is dominant. For heterozygous, we're talking about different, so that'll be big P, little p. Phenotype then is the physical characteristic, so we have to think about whether this will be purple or white. Since it has an allele for both purple and for white, we know that the purple wins over white, so the resulting flower will be purple. And finally, homozygous recessive. So homozygous meaning the same, recessive meaning lowercase letters, so we'll write it like this. Well, both of those are the alleles for white flowers. There's no purple flower allele to override it, so it must be a white flower. Okay. Down below in number 7, we see that round seeds are dominant over wrinkled. So we want to do the same thing down here. I've reorganized it a little bit, so let's go ahead and fill this out together. So for the first example, we see the heterozygous individual here, big R, small r, so we write heterozygous here. And over here, we have to think about what the phenotype will be. Well, remember, big R is round, small r is wrinkled, but the big R is going to be dominant over that small r, so we end up with round seeds. Okay, so we saw that the heterozygous individual here, big R, small r, is going to produce round seeds. And down here we see it's already filled in for us. Round seeds is going to be capital R, and since they're the same, we're going to have a homozygous, and because they're both capital R, it will be dominant. And then finally here we have two small r's. That means homozygous. And they are small r's, so they will be recessive. Over here we have round seeds are going to be the dominant allele. Seeds are the recessive allele, so this must be a wrinkled seed. And this is kind of a picture of what that would look like. Alright, so down below here, it gives us an example of Punnett square. And this says a pea plant is homozygous recessive, that's going to be this individual here, is bred or crossed with a heterozygous round seed plant. Heterozygous, but it's round. Do the Punnett square and predict the odds. So we fill in the Punnett square. Big R goes here, small r goes there. Big R here, small r there. Small r, small r, small r, small r. And what we get from this is a genotype ratio. And a genotype ratio is going to be the ratio of the homozygous dominant to the heterozygous to the homozygous recessive genotypes. And in this scenario, there are 0 capital R, capital R's. There are 2 heterozygous individuals, and there are 2 homozygous recessive individuals. 1, 2, and 2, 1, 2 heterozygous. Then using that, we can find the phenotype ratio. And remember, the phenotype is the physical characteristic. So we're going to look at how many round peas are there and how many wrinkled peas are there. Well, over here, in order for one of them to be round, we know that it must have a capital R in there. So we see 1, 2 of these individuals have a capital R, so that's 2 of them round. And 2 of them do not. They are homozygous recessive, so they are wrinkled. And we see that up here, right? So you can just reference straight up here to this chart. So heterozygous is here, round seeds. Homozygous recessive is here, that's wrinkled seeds. All right, so now using what we've kind of gone over here, let's solve out these Punnett squares. All right, the first one says, cross a yellow pea with a heterozygous green pea and predict genotype and phenotype ratios. All right, so this one I go ahead and give you the genotypes. So we can go ahead and put small g here. So that's individual there. And then we're going to put big G, small g here. That's there. All right, and then we do the cross. And it looks like that. And then we come over and we say, all right, the genotype ratio is the ratio of the homozygous dominant to heterozygous to homozygous recessive individual. In this scenario, the probability out of 4, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, the probability out of 4 being homozygous dominant is 0. The probability being heterozygous is 1, 2. And the probability of homozygous recessive is 1, 2. Then we go down to phenotype ratio, and it's going to be the ratio of green to yellow. And in this scenario, and we can always refer back to, remember on the very first page, we had this chart. We can refer back to that if you like. I'll put it right here. okay, we can see that to be green, you must be homozygous dominant or heterozygous because that has the green allele, which is dominant. So 2 of them are green and 2 of them are yellow. All right, so now that we have that down, that was going to be about the simplest example we have here. We can start working our way through these next 4 scenarios. So cross a homozygous dominant purple flower. So again, referencing back to your other charts, we can see homozygous dominant, that's purple, capital P, capital P. So that's capital P, and a white flower. Okay, well, white is the recessive allele, so both of them must be lowercase p. So in this scenario, we cross the homozygous dominant with, and I'm going to do a little curly Q on my P there so we know it's lowercase, and we end up with this. All right, so the genotype ratio here is very simple. It is going to be 0, 4, 0, if we're looking at this. Or another way you could say it is 100% heterozygous. And then the phenotype ratio is going to be the same way, where it must be 4 purple to 0 white, or 100% purple, because all of them have that uppercase P, that dominant allele. All right, moving on to number 10, a homozygous round P. So homozygous means the same, and round, okay? If you remember, again, going back here, round is dominant, so it's capital, it's uppercase, that's gonna be an individual like this, with a heterozygous round P, so that's gonna be this, and predict the ratios again. The genotype ratio. So it'll be 2 of them are homozygous dominant, 2 of them are heterozygous, and 0 are homozygous recessive. And because they all have at least one dominant allele, they will all be round. All right. And so what we've seen in these last 2 examples is that in any cross, if there is a homozygous dominant parent, at least one homozygous dominant parent, all of the offspring will exhibit the dominant phenotype. They may carry a recessive allele, but they won't express it. Now down here in this next scenario, we're going to see it says 2 cross 2 white flowers. Well, if we remember again, white was the recessive trait. Okay, so we're going to have 2 flowers that are both lowercase p. So like this, and when we cross, well, all of them are going to be lowercase p's. Oops. All right. The genotype ratio here is very simple. It's going to be, we'll write it out just to be thorough here. It's going to be 0, 0, 4, or 100% homozygous recessive. And the phenotype ratio is going to be 100% white, because all of them are homozygous recessive. That is a white flower. And finally, we have one more scenario here that's going to make it, keeping it simple, and we'll move on to something more complex. So it says cross 2 heterozygous green peas and predict the phenotype and genotype ratios. So heterozygous, big G, little g, and both individuals are that way. Right? We fill out the Punnett square. It looks like that. All right, now we have something a little more interesting with our genotype ratio. So let's go ahead and write this out again. And what we'll see then is that there is one individual that is homozygous dominant. 2 individuals are heterozygous, and 1 individual is homozygous recessive. Our options for phenotype were green and yellow. And if we need to reference again one more time, we can go back to this chart and we can see which genotypes lead to which phenotypes. And what we see from that is that any of them with a dominant allele, capital G, are going to be green. So 3 of them are green, but 1 of them is going to be yellow. And this is very interesting because in this scenario, both parents were green peas, yet they have an offspring with yellow peas. And that's possible because they are both heterozygous, meaning they are carriers for the yellow allele, so they can be passed on and have a child or an offspring that has yellow peas. Okay, let's move on to something a little more interesting, and that is going to be our challenge question. So challenge question 1 says a homozygous green pea, so homozygous green is going to be capital G, is crossed with a yellow pea, and yellow pea is lowercase g's. And the offspring of that cross are then self-pollinated to create a 3rd generation. So we're going to have to do 2 Punnett squares for this, for generation 2 and 3. So what are the phenotype and genotype ratios of that 3rd generation? All right, so let's figure out, using the 1st generation, what the 2nd generation's ratios are. So there's our cross from homozygous green and yellow. And we know this, we've seen this scenario before, that all of them are going to be heterozygous. We fill it in like that. Now what do we do over here? Well, it says the offspring of this cross are self-pollinated, and they're all the same. So they're just going to be self-pollinated with themselves. So big G, big G, small g, and then we do that cross. And this is the scenario that we just saw up above. We fill this Punnett square in, and we come up with this. And look, it's the exact same genotype and phenotype ratio as above. This time you were just given information about a grandparent generation, and then you were trying to figure out the grandchild generation. So it's a 2-step problem. So the genotype ratio again is 1 to 2 to 1, and the phenotype ratio is 3 to 1. Okay, now let's move on to something a little bit bigger. This is going to be a dihybrid cross. So the question in the scenario is a botanist wants to learn more about the possible combination of traits in pea plants. To do this, they cross a plant, which is going to be parent 1, that is heterozygous for round seeds and has white flowers, with a plant, which is going to be parent 2, that is heterozygous for round seeds and heterozygous for purple flowers. Okay, complete these items below, fill in the Punnett square, and come up with the possible phenotypes and phenotype ratio. All right, so you would use a dihybrid cross like this. So this is a dihybrid cross. And that di, that means 2. So we're looking at 2 traits at one time. In this case, we're looking at round versus wrinkled seeds and white versus purple flowers. All right, and the way to do this, and I've already done this for you as an example, let's look at parent 2. So parent 2 is heterozygous for round seeds, and we see that here, heterozygous, big R, small r, and heterozygous for purple flowers, big P, little p. So let's do parent 1 then. Parent 1 is heterozygous for round seeds as well, big R, small r, but it has white flowers. And we can keep going back to our charts, and in our chart from before, we see that white flowers are small p, small p. So that is parent 1's genotype. All right, so then we need to come up with the possible allele combinations. For this we use the FOIL method. Okay, and we see I've already given the possible combinations down here. So let's do parent 2 first, just because that's already done. And this is their genotype, and we use the FOIL method. So we can, parent 2 could pass on the round allele and the purple allele, the round and white allele, the wrinkled and purple allele, or the wrinkled and white allele. So all of the combinations for 2 are as follows. Capital R, capital P, capital R, lowercase p, lowercase r, uppercase P, lowercase, lowercase. Anyway, that's what's listed out down here. Okay, so let's go back to parent 1 then. So parent 1's genotype, again, is this. And the 4 options are going to be round with white, round with white, round with white again, wrinkled with white, or wrinkled with white again. Okay, so that would be your answer over here. It'd be oh, sorry, looks like I made a mistake there. It'd be like this, in fact. Okay. All right, so now what do we do with this? Well, we took these for parent 2 and put them down the side. And you can see now there are 2 letters for each box. And so we're going to take these and put them across the top. And it'll look like this. And what you'll notice as we go through and do this is that for each of these 2 boxes, they will be the exact same. So here we have capital R, capital P, lowercase p. Well, and that will be the same here. And you see as I do this, we're keeping the P's and the R's together. Okay, wow, that was a lot. Now we need to go through and we got to think to ourselves, what are the possible phenotype combinations? And remember, we're comparing round seeds and wrinkled seeds, purple flowers and white flowers. So the first trait we're looking at here is round versus wrinkled, and then purple versus white. So the possible phenotypes are round and purple. Those are the 2 dominant ones. We have round and white. Then we have wrinkled and purple. And then we have wrinkled and white. Okay, so the phenotype ratio is going to be the number of each of these compared to the others. I think that the easiest one to notice always is going to be the homozygous recessive individual. So here, and we know that lowercase r's in this case are going to be for wrinkled, and the p's are going to be for white. So wrinkled and white, we have 2. Okay, now we're moving on, and let's go back to the dominant case. So we're going to be looking for the ones where there are a round allele, at least one present, and at least one purple allele present. So that is noted here. There is one here. There's 2. There's 3. There's 4. There's 5. There's 6. Okay, so there are 6 round and purple. Now we're going to go through and look for all of those that are round and white. So a capital R, at least 1, with 2 lowercase p's. And we see that here. You see 1, we see 2, we see 3, we see 4, we see 5, and 6. All right, 6 of them are round and white. All right, and we've already used that one, and we've already used that one. We've used this one and this one already as well. We've also used that one and that one. Okay, so now we're looking for wrinkled and purple. So we're looking for lowercase r's, 2 of them, with an uppercase P. That is only seen here and here, so that is 2. All right, so our final phenotype ratio is 6 of them round and purple, 6 round and white, 2 wrinkled and purple, 2 wrinkled and white. I hope this helped as I went through today. If you have any other questions, feel free to drop something in the comments or let me know. Have a good day.